On a bitter winter night, widowed schoolteacher Evelyn Marlowe is cast out of town after being fired for showing mercy to a hungry child. Half frozen and alone in the snow, she believes the world has finished with her, until a wealthy ranching tycoon named Cole Ashford finds her, wraps his coat around her shoulders, and quietly refuses to leave her side. What begins as a simple act of kindness becomes a slow, tender journey of healing, second chances, and learning that her life and her heart are far from over. The snow did not fall in soft, pretty flakes that night. It came down in thin, needling threads, slanting on a hard wind that cut straight through wool and bone, turning the main street of Ash Hollow into a long white blur. Evelyn Marlowe stood on the edge of that street with a carpetbag in one hand and her schoolbooks in the other, watching the light fade from the windows she had once thought of as friendly. Her breath rose in small, ragged clouds. It did not seem possible that a town she had served for 4 long years could turn its face from her so quickly. The schoolhouse door had closed behind her an hour ago with a final, echoing thud. Now only the church lantern and the saloon lamps burned, sending weak little halos into the swirling dark. "You have made your choice, Miss Marlowe," Mrs. Turner had said, chin sharp as a hatpin. "A teacher who defies the wishes of respectable families has no place instructing their young." Respectable. Evelyn's gloved fingers tightened on the worn leather handle of her bag. Apparently, respectable meant turning a half-starved boy out of class, because he nodded off at his desk after walking 5 miles on an empty stomach. She had given him her lunch instead. 1 small loaf, an apple, a hand on his hair, and a quiet word that he was safe to sleep a little if his eyes refused to stay open. That had been enough. The boy's father, a ranch hand with a temper and a fondness for drink, had taken offense. His sister, married to one of the town's shopkeepers, had carried the tale with all the skill of a born gossip. By week's end, whispers had sharpened into accusations. Favoritism, poor discipline, encouraging laziness. By supper time, the school board had met. By nightfall, Evelyn had been asked to turn in her key. Now dismissed, she stood with her life reduced to 1 carpetbag and a stack of readers and arithmetic primers pressed tight against her chest. The boarding house door she had once walked through daily was shut against her too. Miss Hattie, all apologies and fluttering apron, had met her at the bottom of the stairs. "I can't go against the board, dear," she'd said, eyes sliding away. "They pay your room as part of your wage. No wage, no room. It's not personal." Evelyn had smiled then, because it was the only thing she had left that belonged to her. "Of course," she'd answered. "It's nothing personal at all." Now the cold climbed her skirts, found the gaps at her collar, gnawed at her ankles through worn boots. The wind smelled faintly of smoke and horses and something frying in lard from the cafe down the street. Her stomach gave a low, embarrassed growl. No one looked her way. The last wagon for the neighboring town had gone at dusk. The stagecoach would not pass again until morning. The little coins in her pocket would barely buy a night's bed in the next place, never mind the fare to reach it. For the first time since her husband had died and left her with nothing but a ring, a name, and a heart full of ache, Evelyn felt truly spare, as if the world had finished using her and now did not quite know where to put her. A burst of laughter spilled from the saloon, warm and rough. A piano clanged out a cheerful, off-key tune. It sounded like life on the other side of thick glass. She turned away and began to walk. The town fell behind her more quickly than she expected, swallowed by the dark. The road ahead was little more than a gray ribbon under her boots. Snow gathered on her hat brim and settled in the creases of her black coat. The carpetbag grew heavier with each step. "You should have stayed and fought," a stubborn part of her whispered. "You should have demanded they listen." But she had seen the faces around the board table. Tight mouths, narrowed eyes, fingers tapping ledgers. She had known that fight was already lost. The boy's face rose in her mind instead. Thin cheeks, hollow eyes, crumbs at the corner of his mouth as he tried to eat slowly, as if kindness might vanish if he finished too fast. If you're listening to this and you've ever been punished for doing the right thing instead of the easy thing, Evelyn's story is for you. And if you believe no woman should have to pay that price alone, You can go ahead and tap the like button now so more hearts find their way to this tale. The wind gusted, tugging at her coat, shoving more cold down the gap at her collar. She kept walking. Her plan, such as it was, had been simple enough when she'd first stepped away from the schoolhouse. Follow the road out past the edge of town, cut across toward the river fork and find the small way station there. They sometimes let travelers sleep by the stove for a few coins. But plans made in lamplight did not always stand up to snow and wind. The miles stretched. Her legs burned, then went numb. The snow deepened in the ruts. Her breath came shorter, harsher. Lights of the town shrank to pinpricks behind her, then vanished altogether. Night pulled its heavy cloak over the prairie. Evelyn's feet stumbled. The carpetbag banged against her shin. Once, twice. On the third stumble she went to one knee, pain flaring up her leg. She stayed there longer than she meant to, breath coming in little clouds that vanished as quickly as they formed. "Get up," she told herself through chattering teeth. "You've no one to carry you, Eve." Same as always. She had been carrying herself a long time, since the fever had taken Thomas, since the bank had claimed their little house and she had sold her mother's wedding china for fare to this far-off town that needed a teacher. She had walked into Ash Hollow 4 years earlier with her head high and her heart mended just enough to keep beating. She had smiled at the children, learned their names, taught them sums and letters and the small courtesies that made life bearable. And now, cast out without so much as a month's wage owed. The cold pressed against her like a hand. Her fingers tingled, then burned, then began to feel oddly thick. She flexed them around the carpetbag handle, wincing as pain shot through the joints. Snow clung to her lashes, turned the world into a blur of gray and white. She pushed herself unsteadily to her feet. The road rose slightly where it cut along a low ridge. She followed it by habit more than sight, boots slipping on hidden ice. At length, when her legs felt as if they were no longer part of her, she saw it. A dark smudge against the snow ahead. A small stand of scrub pines gathered along a shallow ditch. Shelter of a sort. She made for it, her steps little more than a slow shuffle now. By the time she reached the trees, her breath came in ragged pulls. Her cheeks were numb. Her lips ached when she tried to wet them. Her body felt hollowed out. The way it had the day she'd stood beside Thomas's grave and discovered grief had its own kind of cold. She half slid, half stumbled down into the shallow ditch, snow crumbling under her boots. The pines bent under their white loads, making a low, uneven roof above her head. Cut the wind a little. Not enough, but some. Evelyn set the carpetbag down and leaned back against the trunk of the largest tree. Bark dug into her shoulder blades through her thin coat. Her bones hummed with exhaustion. "Just until the wind dies," she whispered, closing her eyes. Just for a moment. Her lashes froze together. Somewhere, a coyote cried, long and thin. The sound shivered through the dark. Her fingers slipped from the carpetbag handle. Snow settled quietly around her boots. The steady hiss of flakes felt almost like a lullaby. For a dangerous, drifting heartbeat, Evelyn Marlowe. The widowed schoolteacher the town no longer wanted. Wondered if it might not be simpler to sleep. No more board meetings. No more cold looks. No more counting coins in secret at night. Just quiet. If you've ever felt so tired you didn't know how to keep standing, you know the place she has reached. And if your heart already aches for her, you can whisper her name in the comments. Even a simple Evelyn deserves better. So she's not alone down here in the snow. Her head sagged forward. Her breath slowed. The world narrowed to cold and dark and the faintest trace of wood smoke on the air. And then hoofbeats. Distant at first, muted by the snow. Then louder. Steady. Not a panicked gallop like a rider fleeing something, but the measured, unhurried rhythm of a man who knew where he was going and saw no reason to rush. Evelyn's eyes fluttered, tried to open, failed. The hoofbeats came closer. Stopped. Leather creaked. A saddle groaned. A voice, shaped by long days on the land and nights under open sky, came floating down the ditch. "Now what in God's winter is this?" Cole Ashford reined in his big sorrel gelding at the edge of the ditch, snow swirling around horse and rider in restless eddies. He had ridden this stretch of road between Ash Creek Ranch and town more times than he could count. He could have done it blindfolded, with the stars hidden and the wind blowing sideways. Even so, he did not take to surprises kindly. He swung his leg over the saddle horn and slipped down, boots crunching in the snow. The gelding snorted, flicking an ear back, and stamped once as if to say he did not approve of stopping in this spot, in this weather, for anything less than urgent business. Cole patted the animal's neck absently, eyes narrowing on the dark shape slumped beneath the pines. "Easy, Jasper," he murmured. "Just someone who ain't where they ought to be." He stepped down into the ditch, snow coming nearly to his boot tops. Cold bit at his cheeks, but he had long since learned to ignore it. Winter was as much a part of his life as the brands on his cattle and the calluses on his hands. The figure under the trees came into clearer view as he drew closer. A woman in a black coat and hat, head bowed, carpetbag at her side. Snow had gathered on her shoulders and brim, turning her into a still, white-crowned statue. For one awful moment, Cole thought he was too late. Then he saw the faint rise and fall of her chest. He loosed a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. "Ma'am?" he called softly, not wanting to startle her if she was merely resting. "You all right down there?" There was no answer. He closed the remaining distance in 3 long strides, his boots sinking deep. Up close, the wrongness of the scene settled into his bones. He had seen bodies pulled from snow before, back in leaner years when men had tried to cross the pass without enough sense or supplies. This woman did not have the look of a drifter. Her coat was worn but tidy. Her hat, though dusted white now, bore a small, neat ribbon. The gloved hand resting limply against her skirt had ink stains along the fingers. Teacher, he thought, with the odd certainty of a man used to taking in 1,000 small details and sorting them quick. He crouched down, bringing his face level with hers. Her eyes were closed. Her skin, what he could see of it where the scarf had slipped, was pale under a scattering of freckles, lashes tipped with frost. Her lips had a bluish tinge that sent a prickle of alarm through his chest. "Ma'am," he said again, more firmly this time. He reached out and brushed snow from her shoulder with his gloved hand. "Can you hear me?" Her eyelids fluttered. Slowly, as if it weighed as much as a wagon wheel, her head turned toward his voice. Brown eyes, dazed and unfocused, blinked up at him. He saw, in the space of a heartbeat, more than he could put words to, bone-deep weariness, stubbornness hanging on by a thread, and underneath it all, a quiet, aching dignity that had not yet been stamped out. Her voice came out a dry whisper, barely there. "I was resting." "Rest later," he answered, his tone going low and steady, the way he used when calming a skittish colt. "Right now we're getting you out of this ditch." She frowned faintly, as if the idea offended some prickly corner of her pride. "I can manage," she murmured. "I don't doubt you've been managing a long time," he said. "But you're not managing now. You're freezing." Her gaze slid past him, taking in the road, the falling snow, the empty fields. "There wasn't anywhere else," she said quietly. Those 4 words told him more than any long explanation could have. He shrugged out of his heavy, fur-lined trail coat in one smooth motion, the chill slamming into him as the cold air hit his shirt. Without ceremony, he draped the coat around her shoulders, tucking it close at the front. The sheer weight of it drew a faint gasp from her. The lining held the stored heat of his body. He saw the moment that warmth reached her. Her eyes closed for half a second, lashes trembling. "Sir, I can't take your coat," she said, though her voice lacked conviction. "You can and you will," he replied. "You've got about as much heat left in you as a stone fence. My coat will do me more good on you than flapping off my back." Gently, he slid his hands under her arms. Her body felt light, far too light, through the layers of fabric. "Can you stand?" he asked. She made an effort, legs pushing against the snow. The effort carried her half a handspan off the tree trunk before her knees buckled. She would have gone straight back down if he had not tightened his hold. "All right," he said quietly, adjusting his grip until he had her more firmly. Then I'll do the standing for both of us. She blinked up at him, eyes a little clearer now. Who are you? She asked, as if recalling belatedly that one ought to know the name of a man who refused to leave your side in a snowstorm. Cole Ashford, he said. I own Ash Creek Ranch east of here. Something flickered in her expression. Surprise, perhaps, and a faint tightening at the mention of his name. Most folk in these parts knew it. Some spoke it with respect, others with a touch of envy, a few with outright resentment. He saw the question forming on her lips and spared her the trouble. Yes, he amended with a wry twist of his mouth. That Ashford. Before you ask, no, I don't usually ride around scooping strangers out of ditches. But you're making an exception of yourself tonight. That startled a weak, disbelieving sound from her that might have been a laugh. If you think every woman left shivering in the dark deserves someone to put a coat around her shoulders, you can say so out loud. The storyteller in your ear murmurs now. You can even type, "No woman left alone" in the comments, just to put a little more kindness into the world than she found today. Cole eased her forward, careful not to jostle. What's your name? He asked. Evelyn, she whispered. Evelyn Marlowe. Miss or Mrs.? The question came out more gently than he meant. Some hurt still sat close to his own bone. Her gaze dropped. Widow, she said simply. He nodded once. Mrs. Marlowe, then. We're getting you on my horse. She looked past him toward the dim outline of the gelding at the ditch's edge. I don't ride, she said faintly. Not like that. Not since. Her voice broke on the edge of some memory he could not see. You'll ride tonight, he said quietly. On your own feet you'll not make it another mile. The way station's closed up by now, and even if it weren't, it's 3, 4 hours yet. My house is closer. Her hand twitched weakly at the coat front. I don't want to be a burden, she said. The words sounded like something oft-repeated, worn smooth with use. I have no money to pay. This isn't a trade, he interrupted. It's decency. Their eyes met again. Whatever she saw in his face then seemed to shift something inside her. Slowly, as if each movement cost her dearly, she gave the smallest of nods. All right, she breathed. He did not waste time on thanks. Hold on to me, he instructed, tightening his grip and pulling her up out of the ditch in one strong, steady motion. She was lighter than she should have been. He could feel the tremor in her limbs even through the thick coat. Her gloved fingers found his arm, clinging just above the elbow. Jasper watched their approach with ears pricked, snorting once in mild disapproval at the extra passenger. Cole stroked the gelding's neck reassuringly. She's light as a yearling, he told the horse. You've hauled salt heavier than this. It took some careful maneuvering to get Evelyn's boot in the stirrup and her hands on the horn. When her strength faltered, Cole simply lifted. One large hand braced at her waist, the other guiding her knee. She was too tired to protest. By the time she realized she was seated, she was already swaying in the saddle. There you go, he said, voice low and firm. You're doing fine. He swung up behind her, one boot in the stirrup, then the other. His chest came broad and solid against her back, the remaining heat of his shirt seeping into her shoulders. His arms bracketed her as he took up the reins on either side. There now, he murmured near her ear. Lean back a little. Let the horse do the work. She tried, muscle stiff with cold. The carpetbag, wedged awkwardly between her knees and the saddle horn, shifted. My things, she whispered. I've got 'em, he said. One-handed, he secured the bag with a strap and looped it over the horn. You worry about staying awake. He clicked his tongue softly. Jasper started forward, picking his way up the ditch and back onto the road with the easy confidence of a horse who trusted the man on his back. Snow swirled around them, but it felt to Evelyn as if some invisible wall had been placed between her and the worst of it. Cole's body boxed her in, his coat wrapped around her like a traveling shelter. Every rise and fall of the gelding's gait pressed her more firmly back against him, reminding her she was not alone on that road. How far? She managed after some time, though her lips felt thick, the words clumsy. Couple of hours if the drifts don't get worse, he answered. You still with me? For now. Stay that way. She might have bristled at the command from another man. From him, in that moment, it sounded less like an order and more like a plea. The rhythm of the horse's hooves, the creak of leather, and the low murmur of Cole's voice blended into a strange, weary comfort. Once, when the gelding stumbled slightly on a patch of ice, Evelyn's fingers tightened convulsively on the saddle horn. I've got you, Cole said at once, his arm firm around her middle for a heartbeat. Jasper's sure-footed. He won't spill you. No one had had her like that in a long time, steady, sure, without demand or price. The thought made something sting behind her eyes. She blinked it away and let the darkness beyond the falling snow blur. By the time they reached the rise that overlooked Ash Creek Ranch, the snow had eased to a fine, floating dust. The clouds thinned just enough to let a wash of pale starlight spill over the land. Below them, the ranch lay spread out along the curve of the frozen creek. Long barn, corrals, bunkhouse, sheds, and the big main house standing a little apart, its wide porch and tall windows glowing warm against the night. Even half frozen and more asleep than awake, Evelyn felt something loosen in her chest at the sight. Home, some traitorous part of her whispered. Not hers, of course. Not in any sensible way. But there was an order to the place. Fences straight, roofs well kept, barn lanterns swinging, smoke rising in steady plumes from the kitchen chimney. That spoke of a life built solid over years, not hurried up in a season and left to rot. Cole felt her shift slightly in the saddle, her head turning faintly toward the house. Ash Creek, he said quietly. My folks staked the first claim when this was nothing but scrub and sky. I've added to it since. Some say too much. There was no boast in his voice, only a simple laying out of fact. She thought of the stories she had heard in hushed tones around town. Ashford money, Ashford land, Ashford stock. Men envied him. Women speculated. Children pointed when he passed, half awed, half uncertain. Up here on this dark rise, he did not seem like some unreachable figure carved out of rumor and distance. He simply seemed solid, present, a man who had spent his life earning calluses and gray hairs rather than polish. He shifted in the saddle, drawing her a fraction closer as Jasper started down the slope. If you believe a man can have more land than he knows what to do with and still be lonely in his own kitchen, the storyteller's voice comes softly now, then you'll want to see what happens when this house full of empty rooms meets one woman with nowhere in the world to go. And if you're still listening, you can subscribe so you don't miss where their road leads from here. A ranch hand with a lantern emerged from the shadow of the barn as they rode into the yard, his breath puffing white. Evenin', Mr. Ashford, he called. Storm caught you after all? We were. His words cut off as the lantern light slid over Evelyn's figure in front of Cole, the big coat swallowing her, her head tipped back against his shoulder, eyes half open and unfocused. Who's that you've got there? He asked, tone shifting to wary curiosity. A lady who almost froze to death on the road, Cole said shortly. Tell cook we'll be wanting hot water and broth. And wake Mrs. White. The hand nodded, already turning toward the house at a trot. Jasper halted near the porch steps with a soft snort, grateful to be still. Cole swung down first, then turned, reaching up for Evelyn. She blinked, trying to rouse herself as his hands closed around her waist. I can climb, she whispered, pride making a weak last stand. Maybe tomorrow, he said. Tonight I'm not taking the chance you fall between horse and porch. He lifted her with ease. For one suspended heartbeat, she found herself held in his arms, the world tilting. The ground too far away, his face too close, the smell of leather and clean sweat and snow all around her. She had been carried once before in her life like this. From her own wedding carriage to the little house Thomas had been so proud to show her. She had not expected, years later, to be carried again by another man, and certainly not one whose name the town spoke like a kind of legend. You're safe now, he said quietly. The words were simple. There was no flourish to them, no grand oath. But something in the way he said them, solid, certain, as if they were a fact he meant to enforce with his own two hands. sent a fine tremor through her. He mounted the porch steps without seeming to feel her weight. The front door opened before he could reach for the knob, light and warmth spilling out. A woman in her 50s, tall and broad-shouldered, with iron-gray hair pinned in a sturdy knot, stood framed in the doorway, apron over her dress, flower on her hands. "Cole Ashford," she said, gaze taking in the sight in a single sweep. "I swear, if you've brought half-frozen strays home again." "Only one," he answered. "Found her sleeping in a ditch like a snowdrift with boots." Mrs. White's expression softened at once, practical kindness taking over. "Well, bring her in then," she said briskly, stepping aside. "You'll let all the heat out with that door standing open." Evelyn felt the shift in the air as they crossed the threshold. The sudden, staggering difference between the bite of winter and the enveloping warmth of a house well tended. The scent of baking, yeast and sugar and something with cinnamon, wrapped around her like a second coat. Her knees sagged in pure relief. Cole felt it and adjusted his hold, one arm sliding under her knees, the other steady at her back. For all his size and strength, there was a gentleness in the way he lowered her onto the long settee near the hearth, as if he feared she might crack. The fire roared in the stone fireplace, casting golden light over the room. Polished wood floors, a heavy table in the corner, shelves lined with books and small, well-kept treasures. This was no rough bunkhouse, no slapdash shack thrown up in a hurry. It spoke of years of hands smoothing railings, of evenings passed in chairs by lamplight, of birthdays and Christmases and quiet, ordinary days. Evelyn's throat tightened unexpectedly. For a woman cast out of her rented room barely hours before, the sight of such settled comfort was almost too much to look at directly. "Boots off," Mrs. White said, dropping into a chair at Evelyn's feet with the authority of a field general. "We'll have no frostbitten toes in my parlor. Can you feel your fingers, dear?" "Yes," Evelyn managed. "They burn." "Good," Mrs. White said. "Means they're thinking about coming back to life." She set to work on the laces with swift, competent fingers. Cole hovered for a moment, then stepped back, scrubbing a hand over his jaw as if trying to scrape away the lingering chill. "I'll fetch blankets," he said. "And dry stockings from the linen press," Mrs. White called after him. "Bring the thick shawl too, the blue one, not that thin thing you call respectable." He huffed something that might have been half a laugh, half a sigh. Evelyn watched him go, the sway of his shoulders, the steady stride. The coat he'd wrapped around her lay heavy still, his warmth wired into its very seams. Mrs. White glanced up, eyes sharp but kind. "You're safe here, you know," she said, echoing his earlier words as if they were a house rule. "He's a good man, stubborn but good. We don't leave folks in the snow at Ash Creek. Whatever the town may say. Whatever the town may say." The phrase snagged on a tender place inside Evelyn. She swallowed. "The town says a great deal," she murmured. "About everyone." Mrs. White snorted. "Town's a mouth that never learned when to close. Don't you let its teeth carry you off." A strange, small sound rose in Evelyn's chest, somewhere between a laugh and a sob. "I was their schoolteacher," she said quietly. "Until this afternoon." Mrs. White's hands paused briefly on the second boot. She said. "So you're the one." "The one." Evelyn's fingers tightened in the coat. "The one who gave her lunch to Jackson Miller's boy and let him sleep by the stove," Mrs. White said matter-of-factly, as if naming the day of the week. "Word gets around. I do our ordering in town. Shopkeeper's wife was already gnashing her teeth about it when I stopped in for sugar. Said you were soft." Her lips pursed. "If more folk were soft that way, I reckon there'd be fewer hungry children and fewer hard men in the world." Heat pricked behind Evelyn's eyes, this time not from cold. "They dismissed me," she whispered. "Said I'd undermined their authority." "Good," Mrs. White replied dryly. "Sounds like the kind of authority that needed undermining." Evelyn let out a breath that trembled. "You don't even know me," she said. "I know enough," Mrs. White countered. "I know you gave bread to a hungry child, and you ended up freezing in a ditch for it. That tells me more about you, and about them than any gossip could. She patted Evelyn's calf. "Lift your foot, dear. Let's see these toes." By the time Cole returned with blankets and a shawl, Mrs. White had set Evelyn's boots near the hearth to dry and wrapped her feet in thick wool. "She'll do," the older woman pronounced. "Hands and feet'll ache something fierce when they finish thawing, but we'll keep all of 'em." "Glad to hear it," Cole said quietly. He draped a heavy wool blanket over Evelyn's legs, then settled the blue shawl around her shoulders, tucking it beneath the collar of his coat with surprising care for such work-worn hands. "There," he said. "Better." She looked up at him, at the lines of weather and weariness around his eyes, at the way his concern sat plain on his face without making him look foolish. "Yes," she said simply. "Better." Outside, the wind pressed against the walls of Ash Creek Ranch and found no way in. Inside, the widowed schoolteacher who had slept alone in the snow did not feel like the same woman who had collapsed beside the drifted fence an hour ago. Clara Ellsworth sat on the edge of the cabin's old settee, wrapped in his thick wool coat like a shield. The lining smelled of smoke and cedar and something steady, something she'd forgotten existed. Her hands trembled against the mug of coffee he'd given her, steam curling into the hush of the room. Calder Whitaker moved quietly near the fire, stoking the embers with the ease of a man who'd learned patience from the land. He spoke little, but the crackle of the flames seemed to speak for him. "You're inside now, you're safe. You should have frozen out there," he said softly, eyes still on the hearth. "I nearly did," she replied, voice raw around the words. Her fingers clenched the mug tighter, as if it might steady her past. Calder finally lifted his gaze to her, gentle, surveying, never intrusive. "You don't owe me the story," he said. "But sometimes telling it helps a body remember they're not alone." A bitter laugh escaped her throat before she could stop it. "Alone is all I've been for a long time." He didn't flinch at the edge in her tone. Instead, he pulled a chair closer, not too close, and sat, elbows resting lightly on his knees. "I found you half buried in snow," he said. "I don't reckon a woman curls up to die unless she's been through something worse than the cold." Clara swallowed hard. The words landed like truth on a bruise. Her eyes fell to the coat around her shoulders. "I was a schoolteacher," she began. "Haven Ridge. One-room clapboard building. 40 children from the next 3 towns." He nodded once. "Kids can be the saving of a person." "They were," she whispered, "until they weren't." She told him about the father of one of the wealthier boys, how he'd accused her of impropriety simply because she'd scolded his son, how whispers had turned into shouts, how the school board, all men of that ranching family's circle, had fired her without ceremony. "I'd already buried my husband 2 winters before," she said, voice thin. "Now I was burying the only purpose left to me." Calder's jaw tightened. Quiet rage on behalf of a woman he barely knew. Not loud, not showy, just the kind of anger decent men feel when they see cruelty. "What they said about you," he murmured. "I don't need to know, but I know the look in your eyes, Clara. I've seen it in my own." She blinked. "In your own." He leaned back, letting the firelight draw the lines on his face. "My wife passed 3 years ago this spring. Took a bad fever after the calving season." His voice lowered. "Sometimes the land takes more than a man is ready to lose." Clara felt the room tilt, grief recognizing grief like 2 old neighbors. She breathed slowly, letting the warmth seep into places the cold had colonized. "You're a rancher?" she asked. Calder let a thin smile appear, unimposing, unforced. "Used to be. Now folks say I'm something uglier." "What's that?" "A man with more money than he knows how to spend." The admission fell like snow on still water, quiet, but with ripples. "I own 5 spreads between here and Silver Mesa. Cattle, horses, freight contracts. But all that," he waved a hand toward the logs stacked near the stove, "it doesn't do much good if the only chair in the house is empty every night." He stood then, slow, deliberate, never crowding her. "Sleep," he said. "Not on the floor. Not by a wagon. Not by a grave. Sleep where it's warm." She hesitated, every instinct of pride and shame clawing at her. "I can't." "You can," he replied, voice steady. "You made it to my land, didn't you? That means the rest of the world already did its worst and failed." Her breath shook. She held the mug against her cheek, absorbing its heat. Calder's next words were softer still. "You're safe now, Clara. Not a rescue. Not a claim. Promise." It pierced something deep within her chest. Something that hadn't dared feel hope in years. For the first time in months, she dared to close her eyes. Not the quick, frightened blinking of a woman napping upright in a chair so nobody could accuse her of idleness. Not the fitful half-doze on a train bench with her satchel under her feet and one eye on the door. She lay down on the narrow bed he'd shown her. Plain, clean, the quilt patched but thick, and let herself stretch out all the way. Calder had left the door cracked, not from carelessness, but to prove he trusted the world not to turn on her in the night. The big wool coat lay over the quilt like an extra shield. The storm muttered around the cabin, snow hissing against the window. Firelight flickered along the wall, softer now, as the wood settled into a steady burn. Clara stared at the ceiling for a long while, the familiar parade of worries trying to march past her mind's eye. Debts, letters never answered, faces turned away at the boarding house. But they felt distant, muted. The last thing she remembered before sleep finally swallowed her was Calder's voice. Low and sure. "You're safe now, Clara." Whether she believed it or not, her bones did. Sleep came like a mercy. Morning light woke her before the rooster did. It came in thin but honest through the small frost-rimmed window, painting the room in a pale gold. For a moment she had no idea where she was. Her fingers scrabbled for the edge of a blanket that wasn't there, reaching instinctively toward the right side of the bed where Henry had once slept. Henry wasn't there. Henry hadn't been there for a long time. The familiar stab of grief pierced her chest, sharp and precise. But underneath it, something was different. The mattress did not sag with age. The air did not smell of damp or dust. Instead, she caught the faint scent of coffee and bacon drifting under the door. Her stomach answered before her head could. It growled, loud enough to make her blink. Clara pushed herself up, the borrowed shirt he'd left for her falling loose around her wrists. Her own dress hung over the back of a chair where she'd laid it to dry, the hem no longer stiff with ice. Someone, Calder, she supposed, had set her boots near the hearth in the corner, turned on their sides so the leather would warm, not scorch. The simple evidence of quiet care made her throat tight. She dressed quickly, fingers fumbling only a little with the buttons. When she opened the door, the sound of a pan scraping and the murmur of a man talking low to himself met her. "Easy, you stubborn thing." Calder's voice drifted from the main room. "You squeal like that, I'll think you're Henry's banker come back to life." Her brows knit. She stepped out. The cabin looked different in daylight. Last night it had been a blur of fire and shadows, of heat and exhaustion. Now she could see the details. The well-swept plank floor, the sturdy table with its mismatched chairs, the shelves along one wall full of neatly stacked tins and jars. A rifle rested on pegs near the door, high enough a child couldn't reach it. A single framed photograph sat on the mantel. Not ostentatious, just present, like someone who'd stepped into another room and might return. Calder stood at the stove in shirt sleeves rolled up over strong forearms, turning bacon in the pan. The same easy confidence he'd shown in the snow translated here. Nothing rushed, nothing wasted. He glanced over his shoulder as she came in. His eyes immediately took stock, checking her color, the steadiness of her step, the way she wrapped her arms around herself or didn't. "Morning," he said. "You look less like a ghost today." "I feel less like one," she admitted. He nodded, satisfied, and turned back to the pan. "There's water in the basin by the door if you want to wash up," he added. "Coffee's on the stove. Cups are that shelf above your head." The casual way he said it, a matter-of-fact invitation into his space, not as a guest to be tiptoed around but as someone with the right to reach for a cup, caught her off guard. "You're very trusting, Mr. Whitaker," she said, moving to the basin. "Calder," he corrected. And I figure if you were the thieving kind, you'd have started with my horse's saddlebags last night. You were closer to them than I was for a while. She huffed a quiet, unwilling laugh. I was a little too busy not freezing solid. That too, he agreed. She washed quickly, splashing the cool water over her face, letting it chase the last remnants of sleep. When she reached for a towel, she realized it was softer than anything she'd used in months. Edges neatly hemmed by someone who'd known their way around a needle. Your wife? She asked before she could stop herself, fingers grazing the stitching. Mostly, he said. Some of it's my sister's work. She sends things up from Denver when she remembers I'm half civilized. A beat of silence fell. Clara dried her face, then moved to the stove, hovering uncertainly. Sit, he said, jerking his chin toward the table. You stand there much longer. That coffee's gonna think you don't love it. She sat. He poured her a cup, setting it down within easy reach but not sliding it directly into her hands, as if he knew that might feel too familiar. Bacon and eggs followed. Simple, hearty, far too generous for someone who had nearly died in his snowbank the night before. Eat slow, he warned. Your stomach might have forgotten what a decent meal is. It remembers fine, she murmured, though she obeyed, taking small bites, letting the warmth spread. For a few minutes they ate in companionable quiet. The storm had worn itself out in the night. Through the window she could see a clean white world. The snow drifted high along the fence lines and sparkling under a clear blue sky. When the edge of her hunger eased, other worries crept in to take its place. I should go back today, she said at last, setting her fork down. To town. To the boarding house. They won't have kept my room, but perhaps someone knows of work farther west. I can't impose on you. Calder took a drink of coffee, swallowed, and set the cup down with care. You're not imposing, he said calmly. You were dying in my snow. We haven't reached imposing yet. She flushed. You know what I mean. I do, he said. I also know the road to town's blocked clean shut in 3 directions. That feeder trail you collapsed on is the only one I trust a team on this morning, and I'm not hitching horses to a sleigh just to deliver you back to a place that already threw you out. She stiffened. They didn't throw me out. Fired you. Turned you off their books. Let the lies stand. He held her gaze not unkindly. That's throwing out with extra steps. Her lips pressed together. It was still my post. Was, he agreed. Past tense. And from the way you were curled against that fence post last night, the only thing you owed that town anymore was a grave. I've got better uses for graves on my land. She blinked, startled into a shaky laugh. Is that your way of being comforting? It's my way of being plain, he said. You're not going anywhere today, Clara. That's not me dictating. You stand up too fast and you'll see it yourself. You're welcome here, till we sort something better. Something better, she echoed, doubt curling around the words. His eyes softened. You don't believe better's an option anymore, do you? She looked down at her hands around the coffee cup. The answer lay there. Red, chapped knuckles, broken nails, the fine tremor that hadn't quite left. I believed in a lot of things once, she said quietly. In the goodness of work. In the kindness of a town that watched its own children grow up. In vows spoken over a farmhouse table. Those beliefs didn't hold. And yet you took a job in a town that barely knew you, and you taught their young uns with your whole heart by the sound of it, Calder said. That tells me there's still some belief left under all that frostbite. Her eyes stung. He took pity on her and changed tack. You said last night you taught 40 children, he went on. That right? More, some seasons, she answered automatically. Once word spread that the district wasn't turning anyone away. Some of them rode nearly an hour in. Then you're not just a schoolteacher, he said matter-of-factly. You're a miracle worker. She snorted softly. You've never met a room full of 7-year-olds with slates and no sense of volume control. I've met a room full of ranch hands with cards and no sense of money, he countered. I'll take the 7-year-olds. That drew a real laugh out of her. Small, genuine, curling something warm through her ribs. "There she is," he said quietly, almost to himself. "Thought I saw her under the snow." She swallowed, startled again by how closely he watched. Not like a man assessing livestock or an investment, but like someone making sure a fragile thing didn't crack in his hands. After breakfast, when she tried to insist on helping wash dishes, he merely slid the basin across to the other side of the table. "You can sit and dry," he said. "I'll wash. You wobble on those feet of yours, we're back to square one." She wanted to argue. Pride pushed against her ribs, hot and indignant. But when she stood to fetch the towel, the room tilted just enough to make prudence win. She sat, dried, watched him move around his kitchen like a man who had grown used to doing everything himself. The thought tugged at her. "If you own so much," she ventured, "why do you live here?" She glanced around the modest cabin. "I expected marble floors and chandeliers, if I'm honest." He huffed a low laugh. "You'd hate it. Too shiny. Not enough sense." "So you do have something bigger?" she pressed, curious despite herself. He nodded once, still washing. "Main house is 15 miles south, closer to the rail spur. Looks like a hotel married a barn and they had a stubborn child. I stay there when business demands it." "And the rest of the time?" He shrugged one shoulder. "This was mine before the money. 2 rooms, good stove, a roof that holds. Built half the beams with my own hands. Back when all I owned was 3 cows and a broke-down wagon." Clara traced a knot in the tabletop with her thumb. "Feels honest," she said at last. "That's why you're here and not in the big house," he replied. "One thing at a time." She frowned slightly. "One thing." He dried his hands and finally met her gaze again. "Finding out who you are when you're not fighting for your next meal," he said. "A woman needs room for that. And quiet." The idea stunned her. Who she was, apart from struggle, apart from grief, apart from other people's stories about her. She couldn't remember the last time anyone seemed to care. She looked at him, truly looked and saw it. The wealth he spoke of was real, yes, but it weighed on him like an extra coat. The simple cabin, the worn mug, the mended curtain, these were the things that looked like they fit. "Are you lonely, Mr. Calder?" she asked before she could weigh the propriety of the question. He leaned back against the counter, crossing his ankles. "Yes," he said simply. "Some days it's quiet. Some days it's lonely. Men I pay see my name on a check. Bankers see numbers. Families in town see a man to ask favors of or blame when he says no." His gaze didn't waver. "Last night, for the first time in a long while, someone looked at my cabin and saw a place to survive the night, not an opportunity." Clara's cheeks warmed. "I wasn't exactly in a position to think of much else." "That's the point," he said gently. "You weren't calculating. You were just cold. Desperate," she corrected under her breath. He tilted his head. "You still are." She considered that. "Yes," she admitted. "But, for the first time in a while, I'm also curious about what comes next." "Good," he said. "Curiosity's a sign the soul's still kicking." The next hours passed in a blur of small, ordinary tasks. Exactly the sort of things that had anchored her in better years. Calder brought in more wood. She sorted it near the hearth. He checked the roofline for ice. She brushed snow off the window ledge. When she offered to mend a tear she spotted in one of his shirts hanging on a peg, he hesitated only a second before nodding. "Threads in the tin box on the shelf," he said. "Needle in the lid. Try not to stab yourself. You're the only schoolteacher I've got." She settled with the shirt in her lap, fingers finding the familiar rhythm of needle and thread. The act of repairing something, of making an object stronger than it had been, eased some knot in her chest. While she worked, he told her things in slow drips. How he'd come west as a teenager with nothing but calluses and a mule. How he'd met Rose, his late wife, when she'd been hired to cook for a branding crew. How they'd saved and sweated and nearly lost everything twice before the railroad contract changed their fortunes. "Rose used to say the Lord didn't trust some folks with money because they'd go soft," he said, a faint smile touching his mouth. "Then he dumped a pile of it on us just to see if she'd make good on her promise to give most of it away." "Did she?" Clara asked. Trying, he said. Even gone, she's still getting her way. I put aside a fund for the school in Haven Ridge, you know. Bought slates, readers, coal. Even when the tax board pinched. He paused. Didn't do you much good in the end. Clara's needle hesitated for a heartbeat, then moved on. I didn't know, she murmured. You weren't meant to, he said. Charity that comes with names attached has too many strings. She looked up. Is that what this is? Charity? He met her gaze squarely. No. This is me making sure my land doesn't become a graveyard for people who deserved better. She absorbed that, the words settling somewhere deeper than her wounded pride. What happens? She asked slowly. When the road reopens, when the snow melts, when I'm strong enough to walk to the next town. What then, Calder? He was quiet for a long moment, considering. What do you want to happen? He asked at last. Nobody had asked her that since Henry died. Not really. Not beyond the practical. Where will you live, Clara? How will you earn? What did she want? The answer frightened her in its softness. I want a door I'm allowed to open without wondering if I've overstayed my welcome, she said. I want work I can do without having to listen for footsteps in the hall that means someone's about to tell me there's been a complaint. Her voice dropped. I want to sleep without bracing myself to be moved on. He nodded slowly, as if she'd confirmed something he'd already suspected. I can't promise the world will stop being foolish, he said. But I can offer you this. Work that suits you, a roof that doesn't leak, and a front step you don't have to apologize for standing on. Her heart thudded once, hard. What work? She whispered. He pushed off the counter, moving to the small table by the wall where a stack of papers lay. Picking them up, he brought them over and set them in front of her. Drawings, plans, figures scribbled in a strong, blocky hand. At the center of one page, a rectangle labeled schoolhouse, with neat lines indicating windows, desks, a small stove. I've got 33 children between my men and neighboring homesteads, he said. More on the way if folks keep marrying at the rate they are. The main town school is 10 miles beyond Haven Ridge and mostly full. Rose always wanted a proper school closer to our ranches. I've been dragging my feet, saying it wasn't the right time. Clara stared at the plans, fingers tightening on the half-mended shirt. You want to build a school here, she said slowly. I do, he said. And it occurs to me a man doesn't often have a schoolhouse fall out of the sky along with a teacher. Would be foolish not to see if the Lord's nudging me. Her laugh came out more like a gasp. Calder, you don't even know if I'm a good teacher. I know you walked through a storm to keep doing it somewhere else, he countered. That tells me plenty. The rest, we'll find out when children raise their hands and ask questions and you learn which ones to answer straight and which ones to answer with another question. The idea unfolded in her mind like a map. Desks, chalk, slates, small boots thumping on the floor, the hushed concentration of children tracing letters. A place where her skills meant something besides trouble. Fear surged immediately to meet the hope. People will talk, she said quietly, about a fired teacher being hired by the man who paid for the old school's coal. They'll say you took in a stray to ease your conscience. They'll say I came here because you're, well, she gestured vaguely. Rich. His mouth crooked. They already talk, Clara. They'll find ways even if I never build a thing. I've lived long enough to know I can't run my life by the volume of other people's whispers. She was silent. He looked down at his hands a moment, then back up. Think on it, he said. We've got weeks before the ground's soft enough to set proper footings. You're safe here in the meantime, whether you say yes or no. There it was again. You're safe here. The words wrapped around her, warm and terrifying. Safety meant roots. Roots meant something to lose. Clara looked at the sketches, at the man who'd drawn them, and felt the old instinct to run war with something newly stubborn rising in her chest. I'll think on it, she said at last. He nodded, accepting that as enough for now. Outside, the sun crept across the winter sky, turning the snowfields to sheets of blinding white. Inside, in the little cabin that had become a crossroads, a widowed schoolteacher and a lonely millionaire cowboy went about the small work of a day. Mending, tending, talking in pieces. Neither of them knew it yet, but somewhere between the stitching of a shirt and the sketching of a schoolhouse, something fragile and fierce had begun to grow. It looked, from the outside, very much like hope.